start the ceremonies without the bridegroom being present. We don't sit. Okay, we're going to call to order our first hearing of the evening. This is the application of Christopher and Julie Kelly. It's dated July 9th, 2018, and the applicants are requesting permission. They want a variance to remove a sunroom at the rear of their home and to replace it with another sunroom in a similar location. And because of the configuration of the lot, we get involved in this mysterious formula for trying to determine what the rear setback should be, and it's really dependent on the average depth of the lot. And I'm not going to attempt to try to calculate that, but our building inspector has done it for us. And therefore, under section 61 of the bylaw, the rear setback is 19.62 feet, and in this instance, the Kellys are seeking to propose to construct the new addition 12.5 feet from the rear lot line, and the property is located in a residency district. Mr. Kelly, you can come on up here and make yourself comfortable while I'm covering some of the no, right there, you sure, right, the prime seat.
Hot seat.
Yeah, the hot seat, that's even better. But so we have as evidence at the hearing, the application dated the July 9th, 2018, filed by the Kellys. We have a denial letter by Mr. Prondak. It's dated July 3rd, 2018. And we have a plot plan of the proposed additions by Donald Rosa. It's dated May 24th, 2018, and it shows the existing property, the existing garage, the proposed porch on it. I guess maybe that doesn't relate to this particular application, does it, the porch?
Well, it's the porch that we're enclosing. Currently it's a screened-in porch, and we're
Okay.
basically enclosing that and increasing the depth and width, about 2 feet on either side.
Okay, that's good. So we thank Mr. Rosa and Mr. Kelly for supplying those particular pieces of evidence. We did receive from neighbors letters. I thought they may be all similar, but they're not. They're all different. So I'm going to not read them verbatim, but I'll just summarize them quickly. We have a letter from Mike Larson of 7 Valley Road in Milton. He writes to the Board of Appeals on August 8th, 2018. He's writing to support the Kellys' application. His family and the Kellys have been neighbors for over 10 years, and they've discussed the renovations. And his property abuts the Kellys on the north side, and he supports the variance application. Chad Lundeen and Beatrice Santon of 23 Valley Road in Milton write to us on August 11th, 2018. And they're neighbors and direct abutters, and they support the present renovations being proposed by the Kellys. They've known the Kellys for also over 10 years, and they've reviewed the plans, and they see no substantial impact to their property. Ian Maripole of 45 Avalon Road in Milton writes to the board on August 13, 2018, writing in support of the application, and says they've been neighbors of the Kellys for only several years, so they're newbies in the neighborhood, but they wish the Kellys their best on their project and hope they get the variance. And the last letter is from Maureen McCarthy of 28 Avalon Road, Milton. It's dated August 14, 2018, writing in support of the application. They've been neighbors for the Kellys for many, many years. They've reviewed the renovations. The Kelly property and their property are direct abutters on the south side, and Maureen Kelly supports this application for variance. So we thank all of the applicants. I did not mention, because it was in my other pile, and that the Kellys have also filed proposed drawings by, looks like GFH Design, in multiple sheets showing the proposed addition and the renovation from every perspective known to man, including profiles of the property. So that's really helpful, and pictures of the property. So I'm sure Mr. Kelly's going to get involved discussing those with us. So the rules of the board are going to be, we'll hear from Mr. Kelly, we'll hear from people who have questions of Mr. Kelly, we'll hear from people who wish to speak in support of the application, and anyone who has any questions or wishes to speak in opposition to the application. We're tape recording the proceedings tonight on this little tape recorder. Would ask that before anyone speaks and testifies that they tell us their name and address and speak up nice and loud, even though we have a relatively small room here, so we'll have an accurate transcription of the evidence of the proceedings. So without further ado, Mr. Kelly, welcome to the Board of Appeals. It's
Thank you for having me.
good to see you.
Thank you all for your time on a
Why don't you
Thursday
tell us
night.
about your application?
So we moved in.
Why don't you tell us your name? Tell us your
Chris
name and
Kelly,
address.
24 Avalon Road. Purchased the property 14-odd years ago with the existing screened-in porch. We found ourselves using it somewhat, but I think it's not the best use of it. My wife and I have been discussing enclosing the porch, getting some more year-round living space with that, and our family's kids are getting older, and everybody could use a little extra room. So that's sort of the highest. We've decided that would be the highest and best use of that area.
You're not renovating the kitchen, you're just enclosing the porch.
Closing the porch, yes.
Like my friend, Mr. O'Brien here,
Yeah.
who has more serious problems in the kitchen.
So just architecturally, when we were drawing up the plans, architect suggested that we go to this a little extra depth and width. He thought aesthetically, it would be nicer. He didn't want to go too far and back up right up into the Lundine's backyard, but he thought this would give you a decent size. It's ultimately would be 2 rooms, a mudroom and a sort of a den, multi-use room. And that would give us, 2 decent-sized rooms, and without making it a monstrous addition in the backyard. And it'd still leave us with some backyard space as well.
Okay, great. Not to get involved overly in the mathematics, but what area are you increasing the gross area of the building?
I believe
Do you know
it's going
approximately?
about 47 square feet.
Okay, and what's the gross area of the residence at the present time, do you know?
The gross is slightly under 17. I believe it's 16 and change.
Okay, 1,600 feet.
And so but that does not include the, so I'm sorry, what we're enclosing isn't 47. That's actually the difference between the, what the footprint is currently,
And what it's going to be?
what it's going to be.
So that's the increase?
That's the increase in, but
Okay.
when I say the 16 and change, I think it's 1688, that does not include that screened-in porch, to the best of my knowledge. That's just the enclosed living area as we have it now.
And is it fair to say that if you secure your variance, you're going to see that the improvement is constructed substantially in accord with the drawings that you've presented to us?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And in your opinion, the improvement to with the screened-in porch and to your enclosed porch is going to be really an improvement to the residence, and it's going to be constructed substantially in accordance with the present color scheme and with similar materials.
Absolutely, yes.
So that it would be aesthetically.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And we see you've had a chance to talk to some of your neighbors. 4 of them have submitted letters in support of your application. Have you actually spoken to more people than the 4 and showed them your plans?
Yes, yes. My first mission was sort of I have 3 of the direct abutters, and that was sort of to get them comfortable with what we're doing. And just in passing, I have, when I would see folks on the street, I said, hey, did you happen to see the letter? I think because there's a circumference of which the registered mail goes out to.
Okay. Yeah, there is. Yes, there
And
is.
so nobody approached me with questions, but I just, if I passed them on the street, I would just mention it to them and make sure that they, anybody, if I asked them if they had questions or were comfortable with what we're doing, just explain.
And would you say that they were substantially comfortable with your
Absolutely, yes.
application? And nobody expressed any reservations whatsoever about your application? Is there a 4th abutter to the premises?
No,
There's only 3,
Only 3 in this.
because of the shape of the lot.
And then there's this, I mean, if you wanted to say someone's across the street, I suppose.
Yeah, but I'm not sure they're necessarily a direct abutter.
Yeah.
Mr. Corcoran back there could answer that, but I don't think
No,
that's.
it's just the 3.
Okay,
Just the 3.
great. Do you have anything else you'd like to add in support of your application?
I believe that's it. It's project my wife and I, we're hoping to go forward as soon as we can on it, and we've been, but that's a good point you make about keeping within the style and the makeup of the current, the neighborhood. We want to keep it as close to that as we possibly can.
Okay, how long do you think the construction project is liable to last?
I would say 4 months. or
Oh,
so.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, there's some other aspects to it, as far as there's another, that's not involved in the variance, we're gonna put a bathroom in on another side and on another existing porch. It's on the second story, but that actually fell within the measurement of the lot. It wasn't close enough to the lot line. So there's a few other things, and they have to excavate for, right now, it's empty underneath it, so they have to excavate underneath. So I think that's going to take some
So
time.
it looks simple on the drawings, but it gets more technical and complex.
Yes.
And you live in this residence with your wife? Do you?
Wife and 2 children.
Okay, and how old are your kids?
They are 12 and 13.
Oh, great. That's great. Congratulations. Where are you people moving during this construction project?
We're going to try and make a go of it.
You are?
My mother already informed me in no uncertain terms that we're welcome only as day guests.
Well, it's, and has your contractor assured you you're going to have these improvements completed before the Christmas time?
We have not had that discussion yet. I guess it all depends, he wants to just find out what happens this evening.
Okay,
as well, so.
that sounds great. Let me see if my colleagues have any questions. Mrs. Quijano?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Therese Quijano. I think Mr. Leonard has covered all my questions, so I'm good.
Mr. O'Brien?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if there's anybody present who has any questions regarding the application. And the record indicates there's no such person present. Is there anybody present this evening who wishes to speak in support of Mr. and Mrs. Kelly's variance application? And there's no such person present. How about the big question, is there anybody who wishes to speak in opposition to this variance application? So there's thundering silence out there. So there is no such person present. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I believe that you guys have handled it nicely.
Okay, well, most people like to quit when they're ahead, so that's always a good strategy, I think. So what we'll do now is we'll discuss the application in open session and vote on it here and now. So, Ms. Quijano, do you want to speak first?
It sounds like a reasonable project and keeping in line with the neighborhood, and so I would be in support of this variance.
Okay, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is, if there's a standard variance, this would be it. It's pretty much everything is behind the existing construction. It's within the footprint. This is the type of variance that this board has seen fit to act favorably upon many times before, and I would be acting favorably on it on this one as well.
Okay, well, I agree with both of my colleagues. I think Mr. Kelly has presented a terrific application. You've done a good job talking to the neighbors and getting them on board. That's an important consideration. Getting petitions or letters submitted is really important. I think the written materials from your designer and from your surveyor and the photographs you've taken have been helpful to allow us to understand this a lot quicker without you having to make a really formal presentation. This is obviously a great improvement to the house. It'll be great for the family, and the neighbors indicate that they think it's a great improvement to the neighborhood as well. So I intend to vote for this variance application. So all those in favor of granting this variance with the usual conditions? Aye.
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 Okay, so the usual conditions, basically, are you're going to construct it substantially in accordance with your plans. If your builder is going to deviate in any substantial way or have any questions, just have him take it up with Mr. Prondak. He has a lot of discretion as to what to allow or what not to allow, but it's got to be in this, substantially in this form. Generally speaking, we put a condition that you should start the construction within 1 year. You don't necessarily have to complete it in a year, but you start it within the year, and then you have to proceed in a diligent fashion to complete it. That is generally entrusted to Mr. Prondak, the building inspector. But if, for whatever reason, sickness, health, personal reasons, or whatever, your project is going to be delayed, come back and see us before the year goes by, and we can give you another 6 months extension.
Very good.
But if you let it expire, then you're going to have to go through this whole process again, and that's, it's too expensive and it's self-defeating.
I very much hope we do not need to go.
So with all of that, congratulations.
Thank you so
on
much.
your-
I appreciate that very
Oh, I
much.
should mention one other thing that's perhaps equally important, and Mrs. Sutton and Mr. Prondak can help you. You've got to record your variance with the Registry of Deeds.
Yes.
And they'll tell you how and where, and
Is there a
depends-
time frame for that? I believe there's a sit period, isn't there, before, 20 days?
Yeah, there's an appeal period. What's going to happen is, once we file the decision, there's a 20-day appeal period. Even though nobody's has opposed your application here, it's still technically possible for somebody to try to appeal. They may be behind the 8 ball a little bit, but, so you have to wait the 20-day period. But that doesn't mean that you can't do certain preparatory work.
I see.
But you just got to be a little careful there, because you don't want to spend a lot of money doing demolition and find out somebody appeals, and then your house is a shambles, and it may take you a year to get the land court to do something for you.
And does the 20 days start today, or?
No, it starts when the decision is prepared. We don't have stock decisions here. We don't have forms that we sign. So we write our own decisions. It generally takes 10 to 14 days to write the decision. It's got to be circulated. Sometimes we're in disparate places and not everyone's available. Then it gets filed with the town clerk. You'll get a copy of it when it's filed, and that starts the 20-day period.
I see. Okay.
But if you want to do some work in support of this, just take it up with Mr. Prondak.
Okay.
So he'll understand that. Okay?
I can probably, that's probably best discussed between the builder and Mr. Prondak.
It is absolutely, and Joe was very very helpful, and he'll be a good resource to you.
Excellent. No, he's been helpful through this, and so has Ms. Sutton, too.
Well, he is, and I think he is. He's a terrific guy, and we're thrilled to have somebody with his experience and his talent to help us, particularly on some of the more serious applications that we run into. So congratulations.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. You want to take a run at this one, Joyce?
Oh, sure.
Okay, that's fine. Great. I may have given you, oh, it's over here. Excuse me. You have time to do that? I mean, if you're tied up.
I'll do it. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. We were talking about presenting this one. I'm like,
Oh, mercy.
I might take this one because I sat on the,
You did.
I've sat
Well, that's
on-
good, because I didn't sit on that.
yeah, I sat on this one with Brian.
Okay, do you want to chair the meeting?
No,
Okay.
no, God, no.
Well, if you can.
that's what I
if you
thought he
want
was
to.
asking. I was like, no.
Not with you here, you know.
I'm liable to fall asleep. Mr. Corcoran, you all set?
I am,
All
thank
set to ramble or rumble, whatever you do here? Okay, so this is our second and last hearing of the evening, and it's past 7:45. This is the application of Carrick Realty Trust dated July 13, 2018, regarding 131 Elliott Street in Milton, and seeking variances from the Milton zoning bylaw, section 3J 4D, and they're seeking to allow the construction of a 47.34 and a half building rather than the 45-foot building that's imposed by the bylaw. In this instance, the application indicates that the Milton Planning Board has issued a PUD special permit for the construction of a building at the proposed site, which I understand is maybe the former Henry site, at a building height of 45 feet above the established average grade, compliant with the bylaw. And this revision would allow a height variance above the 45 feet to 47.34 and a half feet. And Mr. Corcoran's going to tell us all of the reasons why the board should exercise its discretion in granting this variance. The property here is located in a residency zoning district. As evidence at the hearing, we have the July 13th, 2018 application filed by Mr. Corcoran on behalf of the Carrick Realty Trust, to which is attached a series of Allen and Major Associates plans showing the proposed, I believe it's a condominium structure, in all of its facets. Yes, we did receive a letter from the planning board. It's dated August 22nd, 2018. It's to the Board of Appeals, and it's from William B. Clark Jr., the Director of Planning and Community Development of the town of Milton. It's a relatively short letter, and I'll read this into the record so it'll be clear what's being said. I write this letter for the Milton Planning Board. The Planning Board met on August 8th and voted to have me write and sign this letter after their 5-0 supportive vote. On April 12th, 2018, Stephen Conley of the Carrick Realty Trust and attorney Edward Corcoran appeared before the Planning Board to present an overview of their need for a variance from the maximum height restrictions for the new mixed-use building being developed by Carrick at 131 Elliott Street. The Planning Board agreed to the request/need for the height relief and voted unanimously to support the application for a height variance for the new building. Should the variance be granted by the Board of Appeals, the applicant plans to return to the Planning Board on September 13, 2013. I think that's a hint, to get the decision rendered before that time, so as to amend the special permit and the site plan approval. And it's signed by Bill Clark, the Director of Planning and Community Development, and with copies to Mr. Dennehy, the administrator of the town, and to Mrs. Sutton. So those are the evidence that we've received up to date. The rules of the board here are going to be the same as at the first hearing. We'll hear from the applicant, we'll hear from people who wish to speak in support of the application, have questions of the applicant. We'll listen to people who may oppose the application for variance, and we're tape recording this conversation and strike it. The hearing as always, I would ask everyone, speak up nice and loud and clear, tell us your name and address before you speak, so that we'll have an accurate record of the proceedings. Without further ado, Mr. Corcoran, welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Ned Corcoran. I am joined by Steve Conley from the applicant
Hi,
Carrick.
Mr. Conley, nice to see you again.
Carrick Realty Trust, and his architect, David O'Sullivan.
Hi, Mr. O'Sullivan.
I just thought, while we're at it, we've got a letter signed by the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, also in support of the application. We were before the Board of Selectmen on August 13 with an overview of the application as well, and the board voted unanimously to support this application and the letter from Chairman Wells, formerly Chief Wells.
I still call him the chief.
It's right there.
Let me, before you go further, Mr. Corcoran, let me just give due deference to the Board of Selectmen for writing to us. We thank them for that, and let me just read their letter into evidence, so it'll be clear exactly what their position is. It's dated August 21st, 2018. It's from Richard G. Wells, Jr., Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. On August 13, 2018, Stephen Conley of Carrick Realty Trust and attorney Edward Corcoran appeared before the Selectmen to present an overview of their application for a variance from the maximum height restrictions for the new mixed-use building being developed by Carrick at 131 Elliott Street. The Board of Selectmen expressed appreciation for the fact that the demolition of the former Hendry's building was finally underway and voted unanimously to support the application for a height variance for the new building. Signed by Chief Wells, copied to Mr. Dennehy and to Beverly Sutton. So we thank the Selectmen for submitting their views and for hearing the applicant. As everyone knows, I say it too often, but the Board of Selectmen are the elected officials and moving players for the town. We're lawyers who are appointed to this position, and on important projects like the one at 131 Elliott Street, we always like to hear from and seriously consider the opinions of people who are subject to the will and the goodwill of our citizens through the voting process. So thanks to the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Corcoran, I interrupted you. Why don't you continue with your...
Perfectly fine, Mr. Chairman. This is the site of the former Hendry's property at the corner of Central Avenue and Elliott Street. There's quite a history to this property. Conley bought this roughly at the turn of the century, and 18...
Mr. Conley, do you want to object to that? Do you want the objection to be noted?
And it has
going to
gone...
remain silent, okay.
The property has gone through a fairly significant process. It was part of a zoning overlay that was approved by town meeting in 2007. That included 3 parcels. This property, the 36 Central Avenue property that has been developed under that planned unit development overlay, and the Fallon Ambulance Building, which was not developed in accordance with that bylaw, was ultimately redeveloped as Steel and Rye Restaurant with the Ravis real estate downstairs. In 2007, when this zoning was developed, they established a height limitation of 45 feet from the existing grade. Existing grade is somewhat substantial. This is a copy of a map from the town's GIS website that shows grade changes for the property. You can see sort of the number 30 on the right-hand side. That's elevation 30 feet above sea level. It goes down from that point approximately 5 feet to the edge of sidewalk at Central Avenue, and it rises an additional 8 to 10 feet as it comes up to the property line at 145 Elliott Street. You know, you don't really realize it until you get out there and walk it, but there is quite a pitch to the sidewalk as it comes up and down Adam Street from one end to the other. And that grade has created some interesting issues. At the time that the bylaw was enacted, the 45-foot height limitation and 4-story limitation seemed to make sense relative to the requirement that there be a minimum first floor height of 11 feet, and that the remaining heights, floors would be of sufficient height. But that bylaw was enacted 2 or 3 building codes ago, and the building codes have changed, particularly relative to how new HVAC systems, fire suppression systems, and the like are handled within the area between top of ceiling and bottom of the next floor. There's more room now required under the new codes with respect to that. It also is a different definition than what is otherwise allowed in the business zone. Height in under the general bylaw in the business zone addresses the finished grade, the constructed grade, and not the existing grade prior to construction. And there's a difference there because you can regrade a site to work and achieve that 45 feet appropriately if you're starting with a new grade that works for the building as it's designed. So there's a couple of anomalies in there that make it difficult. And as Mr. O'Sullivan came on to begin to do the final design of the building post-granting of the special permit in February of 2017, he really got into the design of issues around ductwork, appropriate height for the first floor, particularly if there's a restaurant, and also to deal with the issue of handicapped van accessibility to 2 levels of parking. So there is the way the site is designed from a building perspective is that there's an entry that will come in off of Central Avenue to a parking area that's at grade of Central Avenue. There's a portion of the building that will be constructed with commercial space in that front corner on the corner of Elliott Street, and then a second level of parking and residential units that will go up 4 stories from the grade of Elliott Street. And so that grade change and the need to have adequate height for handicapped accessible vans to come in and out has really caused the need for this variance. If the bylaw were being developed today to account for this building, then at the time the bylaw was developed with substantial input from the Conleys, with the owners of the lot at 36 Central. The bylaw was being drafted to address the effects of the buildings. That it likely would have been changed. We took the time, I generally take the time to go before the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen, particularly where there's a significant project like this. But it was particularly important in this case because the history of the permitting of this project, that went to the Planning Board under the bylaw, that went to the Board of Appeals under a different approach, back to the Planning Board, really due to hard work from Alex Whiteside, who was then the chair of the Planning Board, and Katie Conlon, I think, who was then the chair of the Board of Selectmen. The 2 of them worked very hard with the Conleys to bring the project back to a scale that really wanted to work for the area. The Conleys worked hard with them, and they arrived at a really good outcome. And so with respect to that, I thought it was particularly important that both boards had the opportunity to see that, and both boards voted to support the application in that regard. We did not go around the rest of the neighborhood. I live nearby, although I'm not in a butter. I do know that in my own travels through the neighborhood that people are very happy to have seen this activity a week and a half ago. The demolition is actively taking place, and the building will be down by the end of the Labor Day weekend, and new construction will start thereafter. It's also important to note that the board has, at least in my experience, on 3 other occasions, granted similar applications for relief. 36 Central, which is the mansard building across Central, actually had a height variance. Board granted an extra foot to address the first floor height at the time, and that was granted in 2010. Granted relief from 45 feet to 46 feet. It's within the same overlay zoning. I came before the board in 2008 to approve a variance for a building that unfortunately never got built. It was the building that was proposed at 2 Adams Street, sitting in front of the extra space storage building, butted up against Adams Street. In that case, in the Milton Village overlay zoning, the maximum height was 5 stories and 65 feet. We needed relief to address grade issues, and the board granted a variance to allow it to go to 69 and a half feet, so a 4.5-foot adjustment to the height of the building. Relative to the average grade, you know, the building from, this building from the grade of Elliott Street is already designed at 74 feet. It's going to go to about 78 feet. The height on the Elliott Street side, excuse me, the Central Avenue side will be at 77 feet. Real height, base grade to top of building. The height of the residential end on Elliott Street is actually not much, it's a floor smaller, so the scale of it will not be that significant.
Can I ask you a silly question?
Sure.
The height we're talking about here is the height above the established average grade. And earlier in your presentation, you mentioned above sea level. Does sea level have anything to do with this?
Yes.
It does.
That's where you set the elevation is all, it's elevation 30.16 is the mean finished grade. I have one of the plans that I submitted is this plan which shows, takes the grade at different points around the building, averages them, and the average grade based on that footprint comes out to elevation 30.16 feet.
What does that have to do with sea level?
That's the number of feet above sea level that elevation sits at.
Okay.
That's how you define base elevation.
Great. That's why I didn't go to engineering school. They wouldn't let me in. Okay,
So that sets the average grade, and from there, you're allowed to go to 45 feet.
yep.
Some of the building will be much higher than 45 feet, and some will be less than 45 feet. It's the average, it's from that average grade.
And the corner piece that's closest to the corner is actually a one-story less building as approved by the planning board. So that part is well within, it's really the part along the tracks that we're talking about that needs the variance. Because the building steps down.
Yeah, I'm going to
Show us that.
So if you can explain that,
Yeah.
David, a little bit more particularly, that would be, obviously be helpful.
David O'Sullivan from O'Sullivan Architects. So the portion of the building that is out kind of in front, nearest the corner of Central and Elliott Street is 3 stories. So it's this area on the corner, this wing of the building, I would say, the wing that's towards the corner, is commercial with 3 stories of residential over it. It steps back when you get along the tracks and along the back part of the site, farthest from the street, as the parking, and then 4 stories. But that also, as it gets closer to the neighbors farther away from Central Street, is buried in the ground. So the height as you get, this is kind of the part gets buried. This is kind of moving towards the neighbors if you're looking at the side with the train, from the train. If you're looking at the other side, actually, this is actually the train side. Kind of illustrates it more how it kind of drops down. The grade drops, as Mr. Corcoran said, towards Central. So as much as the building's kind of low on the corner, it actually doesn't get much higher in relation to grade towards the kind of residences down the street.
Mr. O'Sullivan, just hold it 1 second. Is there anybody out there in the audience who wanted to look at these plans? And I don't know whether you can see what Mr. O'Sullivan was describing. Maybe you can just pull that up, Mr. O'Sullivan. You can stand up, feel free to be comfortable, and just show to any interested person exactly what you're talking about.
So the corner piece on this rendering is pretty much shows it as well. The piece that's on the corner is a lower piece of the building, here and here. And then the part that we're asking for the variance is this part of the building, that if you're looking at kind of looking at the site, this is the tracks up here, so it's this piece of the building. And that is this in the background here. This is essentially looking at the Elliott Street elevation. This is the backside.
Okay.
So the
Thank you-
real,
Thank you, Mr. O'Sullivan. Mr. Corcoran, please.
and the real effect of the height, the changes relative to the height are along the tracks and towards the Central Avenue side, the real changes. They're not in effect visually, physically on the residential, the residence end of the property.
Or on the Elliott Street.
Or on the, at the Elliott Street end. The third time was a broader use and variance relative more broadly to uses and height and other issues was the 50 Elliott Street building. It was the newer building built as part of, as the Milton Hill House built on Elliott Street. There were dimensional setback and a lot of other issues. The height in that case was also allowed to go above 46 feet from the mean grade as part of the broader variance application. In that case, it was
Remember what
46
it went
feet. In 2012, it went to 46 feet
From?
from 45.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And again, that building was designed so that the height faces, really faces the frontage facing across to Boston, and the second floor, the portion of the building was built into the hill, the portion of the building that faces to the neighborhood was only 2.5 stories from the rear elevation. It took advantage of a real significant change in elevation of the property to bury some of that building into the hill. And so with that, we'll conclude our presentation and open it to the board for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corcoran. Mr. O'Brien, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This particular property seems to come back to haunt me because I spent a long, long time working on one of the former proposals on this. So, in summary, Mr. Corcoran, basically what you're suggesting is that for aesthetic reasons and for engineering reasons, there is a need to increase the current height of this structure by roughly 3 feet, and that is to accommodate some of the internal systems.
1 foot for the first floor and 6 inches per floor within the residential areas, and then an additional foot, that's actually a total of 4 feet that we're requesting to address the issues relative to the grade and handicapped accessibility for.
So are these changes that are required because of changes to the state's building code, state changes to the fire code, or what? What specifically?
Probably answer that better. Basically, when we did work through with our structural engineer and our mechanical people, we do have to put a lot of ventilation system in there to meet the newer energy code. So it takes up extra room. And from trying to rework the structure through the building, we actually have a thicker structural system than what was anticipated when the building was designed 5 years ago or whatever. So it's kind of a combination
Structural
of
system, put that in English.
the depth of the joists to hold up the building.
Okay, that's English. Thank you.
Okay. So it's a combination of those two things that came, and a desire to get a little more height in the commercial space to really allow ductwork for that and not have a, have it a more marketable, pleasant space from a commercial standpoint.
Okay.
Particularly if a restaurant were to go in there.
So what are we talking about the average height of both the commercial space and the interior spaces within the building being?
The commercial floor would go from 11 feet to 12 feet.
Yeah, so the commercial space will have a ceiling height of around 9.5 to 10, clear inside. And the building inside, the residential units will be about 8, 10.
Okay. So,
Not anything excessive.
And with the height, the effective changes of the height being within the ceiling to bottom of floor level for ductwork and other.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but did I also hear that the main impact of this from an exterior visual point of view will be concentrated toward the rear of the building by the existing MBTA tracks?
Yes.
And how does that work out to be the case?
The part that's closest to the corner was always only 1 story less. So that never needed a variance. But it's really that back part that was hitting the maximum height. The height of the L, kind of an L-shaped building, the L, the long L that's along the tracks is where the maximum height is.
In your opinion, is this something that would be noticeable to the average person?
No, I don't think so. Don't see that anyone would be able to pick up the extra height.
Okay. Is the extra height kind of like, is it building height, or is it a kind of accessory structures by that? I mean,
No, it's
in like,
within the
you know,
building.
mechanical stuff,
No,
you
it's
know?
within the, kind of the sandwich between the floors and the next ceiling. You know, the ceiling of one floor and the floor of the next, it's kind of in that kind of sandwich. So it's proportionally, you know, 6 inches or whatever on each floor is really not even going to be perceived on a, you know, when you're standing back. It's like 1 extra clapboard in the height of the building, you know.
So is
Floor.
it your professional opinion that based upon the unique characteristics of the site and changes to the building code and other requirements, that this is the least intrusive and the best way to make these changes?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Quijano?
I think you fully covered it. The back, where, as I understand it, the back side is going to go towards the non-residential and towards the, and the tracks. So we'll have the least amount of impact to this project. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was the only clarification that I really
Okay,
wanted.
thank you. The only question I have is with respect to the restaurant. Is it going to be a restaurant to increase the amenities in the area?
It's a possibility, Mr. Chairman. We've had some preliminary interest, but nothing serious.
Nothing definitive?
We are putting the infrastructure in
Right.
to allow for a restaurant, meaning the ductwork to the roof so that we can vent things properly and not vent out to the, you know, get it up and out of the way, not vent it into neighbors' properties or anything like that. So we've made the provisions within the construction drawings to do
One of the
future restaurant without having to modify anything.
One of the interesting things about this PUD bylaw as opposed to the Milton Village bylaw, which was the earlier of the two, is that that bylaw didn't account for adequate first floor ceiling heights to encourage, to facilitate a restaurant, which was encouraged, and so the initial restaurant that went in there at a much lower ceiling, and they had to really jockey the ductwork and to make sure that it could ventilate properly and whatnot. And so a lesson was learned when they wrote this bylaw, but more recently, the changes to the fire and the building codes have pushed this towards a slightly higher first floor.
Okay, so you have no secrets or surprise announcements you can make tonight?
We're currently working on a website, and we're incorporating the plans and the floor plates and finishes alike. When that's ready and that's out, I think there'll be a lot of interest. And now that we've started down there with the demolition, people know it's for real. You know?
Yes.
It's been a long time coming, so.
Well, that's, Mr. O'Brien knows more about that than I do, because he sat on the Board of Appeals hearings, and I didn't have the privilege of sitting on this particular application. Let me, I have no further questions, and so let's see if there's anybody, if you have nothing further to add, Mr. Corcoran. Is there anybody present this evening who has any questions of Mr. Corcoran or regarding the proposed application?
Yes, please.
Okay, then,
My name is James
no,
Carroll.
hold it, slow down. You have to come up here. We're going to switch seats. Mr. O'Brien, you can sit over here. You don't have to sit back there. Sir, why don't you take this seat here? We have to do this for television purposes.
Oh, okay.
These are not projection microphones. They're for recording
Okay.
your voice, and the TV people can't hear you if you're back there, so.
Okay, my name is James Curran. I live at 148 Elliott Street.
How do you spell your last name, sir?
Curran,
Curran, oh, sure. And you're on what number, Elliot?
148.
148, good. Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you, sir.
Good to have you here. Why don't you ask all the questions that you wish?
Okay, I'm just, the main question I have is if this appeal was denied, what would the result be? What would happen to the project? Would it be a financial burden on the project itself?
That's a legal question, but Mr. Corcoran answers a lot of legal questions. So why don't you take a run at that, Mr. Corcoran?
I think obviously, the Conleys would have to determine how they would want to go forward relative to the building, building the building within the current height envelope, make it a little bit more difficult to produce the building that really wants to be produced based on the current code issues. And so that would be the...
Would it likely delay the project, which has just started?
I think it could have a substantial impact on the timing.
And just as just the reason for my question is, well, a little background, we've moved in to our home about almost 30 years ago when Hendry's closed. So we've lived there, we're diagonally across the street from the site. And just the fact, I understand the comparisons to other projects and the variances in height and what's allowed and what hasn't been allowed, and I live with it every day. That's all my point is, and that another 2 feet, 3 feet, I just wanted to know why, basically, and why is this needed after, initial plans were approved and that type of thing. I confess my ignorance to the process, but again, having lived there for this amount of time and hopefully for a lot longer, I'd like to know why it's required.
Okay, well, that's a legitimate question, and I think the question's been answered, and I guess the technical building requirements in more modern structures have to be addressed, and that's what they're trying to do here.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. O'Brien, yes.
Mr. Curran, I wanted to know, so I wanted to know why. And I think that has been answered, at least has been answered to my satisfaction. So.
Well, I would defer to your expertise. Again, it's just, after all the initial years of discussion, just another development that raised my thoughts to as I need to find out more, that's all.
Mr. Curran, your thought process was very similar to mine.
Thank you.
I'll make one comment that this is the third project that I have kind of come into after it's been approved for something. Well, two of the projects are approved. The first one we approved in our office originally, that we've had to go for a similar height variance because of the way the zoning's written versus the way structure and all the ventilation goes into buildings. Because last Thursday night I was at Salem for exactly the same thing for a project approved 10 years ago that we needed a 1'9" height variance for. So I'm running into it on a lot of projects.
I didn't treat you as nicely in Salem as we're doing here.
Not quite as nicely, but they did approve it. That's the bottom line.
I think this board, you will notice that in the earlier application, if you will, a far simpler application, that the board approved it and with plans and asked that the plans be in substantial compliance. So we do try to give the building commissioner, the building department some flexibility here. In this particular case, I think, in my personal opinion, the building commissioner would not have had the flexibility to move beyond that. Things do change. This particular project has had the gestation period of an elephant. So I can understand why, for a lot of reasons, Mr. Carrick, Mr. Corcoran, you came before the board. So, thank you.
You all set, Mr. Curran?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight. Is there anybody present who has any other questions of the applicant? Is there anybody who wishes to speak in support of the application? And there's no such person present. Does anyone wish to speak in opposition to the application for a variance? No such person present. Out of respect for the planning board and the office of the planning director, Mr. Clark, do you want to be heard on this application, or is your letter suffice?
My letter will stand.
Okay, so Mr. Clark stands. Thank you, Mr. Clark, for coming tonight and listening to the evidence. Mr. Corcoran, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I would just find very briefly, I think that based on the topography, based on the changes in the zoning code, I think we've established there's a hardship associated with a need for a variance of up to 4 feet, and without detrimental impact to the neighborhood, and that it otherwise is in conformity with the bylaw. The intent of the bylaw was to produce a building that would revitalize this part of the town, and I think this building as it's designed would do that.
Good, thank you very much. So we'll suspend, well, we'll end, rather than suspend the evidence portion of the hearing and consider the application here and now and vote on it. So, Mr. O'Brien, since you were present at the multifaceted and many meetings on this project, and you're much more familiar with the project and a long-suffering member of the Board of Appeals as it relates to this project, why don't you speak first?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was actually I thought that the process on this particular building before the Board of Appeals was a very good process, a model process. Relative to the application and the relief being sought now, I'm prepared to vote in favor of this. I generally agree with Mr. Cochran that this building and this site, the topography is unique. The challenges relative to grade were in some ways daunting. I do think that changes in the building code have meant that some portions of the zoning code in the town at the moment are out of sync. That happens from time to time. Building code requirements change. I do believe that it would be a hardship for the developer, the town, and the residents to not allow this to go forward, because at the end, I think the relief is being sought is relatively de minimis, and the project, even with the relief, is essentially, in my opinion, in substantial compliance with at least the spirit, if not the actual language of the zoning code. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be prepared to vote yes.
Mrs. Behan.
Thank you. It sounds like there's been, well, I don't have the background, but that there's been significant consideration done in this project that's really going to revitalize that area, and that you've taken into consideration the impact on the neighborhood and, you know, the grades and both where would impact the most, being towards the train tracks and away from the residential area of that street. And for those reasons, I would definitely vote in favor.
Okay. My view is I thought that Mr. Corcoran and Mr. O'Sullivan were extremely helpful in explaining to people, at least like myself, who lack the skills of builders, exactly what this was all about and what the reason for the variance is. And from my viewpoint, it has substantial merit, and I think Mr. O'Brien has eloquently stated the reasons for that, and perhaps we'll even do that in preparing a decision for this particular variance, because he is so knowledgeable about this. But I do think seriously that Mr. Corcoran and Mr. O'Sullivan have made an excellent presentation. And it does have merit. It's one of those types of projects that has the support of the planning board, and we thank the planning board and Mr. Clark for weighing in on this. We certainly thank Chief Wells and the other selectmen for spending their valuable time weighing in on this. expressing their support for the variance application. So I enthusiastically support this application. I really think that Mr. Conley has indicated we do have light at the end of the tunnel, and now it's time for the light to shine in, and the sooner the better. So I intend to vote for this application. One question that I did have just before we vote, dealing with timing and scheduling and all of that. Is there a particular need to have this variance entered? I guess there is, because the planning board is looking for something on the 13th, so if we could do it by the 13th. Does that sound doable, Mr. O'Brien, considering you're
September
professional
13th.
and other things? I suppose that would help the project continue moving forward and in the right direction, and won't delay any planning board approval of the...
We do need to amend the special permit to incorporate the terms and conditions of the variance.
Okay, so that's exactly right, and that's exactly what Mr. Clark said. So all those in favor...
Well, before we vote, and just so that we don't run afoul, it would be my intention to put in just the standard conditions, though this is a unique, I don't think I've ever written one under this particular portion of the code, but it would be my idea to, are there any specific conditions that the applicant would be seeking?
The only one we're seeking is up to 4 feet.
Okay.
Other than that, it says, the plans that you saw are the plans that incorporate those changes to the height.
Okay, because we would have the substantial compliance and all the other standard stuff.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you,
and
Mr. Chairman.
let me just ask you on that point, because I'm not drafting this particular opinion, but then I have to confess to you, I haven't seen the variance. It was granted, I think, a while back, and I think it's probably fairly comprehensive. Isn't it what you're really seeking here is just an amendment of that decision of the board? So you just amend the height?
We're seeking a
Definition
variance from the
in-
definition of the height, which would be,
Under the original decision?
no, it's under the bylaw. The bylaw speaks to maximum height of 45
Right,
feet.
yeah, right.
From the existing grade,
And that's what we gave you?
and that's what you're, that's
But you
what we're
need
asking.
47 feet.
We need 49 feet.
No, I'm sorry, 49 feet, yes. And so really, you can take that decision and just amend the height in that decision and incorporate the rest of the decision into it, so you're not...
Yes, the new, I would anticipate that the amendment to the special permit will be 2 pages that will attach to it a copy of the variance decision, so that they will amend the maximum height relative, and adopt the new plan relative to the 4-foot change.
Right. So we're dealing with a very narrow and specific
Correct.
dimensional issue here.
Right.
And so the decision of the board, I think, to Mr. O'Brien's point and peace of mind, that doesn't have to be a 35 or 40-page decision. We're dealing with this narrow...
The narrow issue of just the height, right.
Right.
That's all you have to do. Mr. Clark, are you coming up to see us?
Whatever it is that your decision is the planning board's decision will be contingent upon what you say. So we'll attach your decision to the final. So we'll let it, after you sign it, after your appeal period is done, the planning board will then sign their decision.
Yeah, I just want someplace that everybody can look at it. and
Yes.
that everybody's on the same page, so on
They will
down the road.
be married together.
Good. Okay.
Okay, so they'll be in
Right,
sync.
but I do agree, I think the decision and the variance can be fairly simple.
Yes.
Right.
It's
and
going to
you-
be very simple.
You could would you incorporate by reference?
Yes.
The earlier decision? Okay, I don't have the earlier decision at hand, and I don't know that Mr. O'Brien does. I don't know that we, do you know,
I
a
have-
copy of that decision?
I have I do have the copy and decision is 18 pages, and Mike.
Is that a recorded copy?
It was
of it?
recorded, this is a copy of the recorded copy. It was recorded on November 9th of 2017.
And does it show the book and page number?
It has
where
the book
was
and page,
recorded?
and I can,
Okay, so there's Exhibit A to our variance application. Well, or could you, we'll talk with Mr. O'Brien, it could just be incorporated by reference. I don't know that you have to attach it.
I just would plan to incorporate it by reference.
Okay, with the-
And I think on this particular decision, the simpler the
I
better.
do too.
And then making it complicated is the enemy of understanding. This thing needs to be simplified.
I agree. So I think, maybe I haven't, I think we should vote the variance if we haven't done it already.
I think we're ready.
Okay, all those in favor of the variance as requested with the usual conditions that Mr. O'Brien mentioned, please say aye.
Aye.
Well, congratulations on your variance. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for
Thank you.
coming tonight.
Thank you, John.
This is something that we adjourned for the evening? We're adjourned.
Oh,